They didn't bury us because we were dead. They buried us because we knew too much. When a quiet logistics officer at a U.S. airbase is humiliated at a checkpoint, what the guards uncover inside her bag sets off a silent alarm linked to a black ops unit long believed to be erased. But, as buried names resurface and shadow agents return, the question is no longer who she was, but why they're trying so hard to forget her. What unfolds next pulls you deep into a world of betrayal, honor, and a past that refuses to stay silent. So before we dive into this classified tale, let us know where you're tuning in from. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story might just be more dangerous than today's. Georgina Bush had long since learned the value of invisibility, not the performative kind that meant sitting in the back of the room or wearing gray tones to blend in. Real invisibility, the kind that could make a warfighter vanish from the world's memory with the stroke of a pen. And she had chosen it, willingly, deliberately. She moved like someone who had once commanded rooms where silence cost lives. Now, she walked corridors lined with dented filing cabinets and humming fluorescents, deliberately slower, deliberately duller. Her sharpness sheathed beneath regulation cardigans and low-heeled boots. In another life, people had called her Blackbird. These days, most didn't even call her by name. The guards at Gate 3 barely looked up when she arrived that morning, just another civilian in a faded field jacket carrying a canvas messenger bag, the same one she'd brought every day since she took this base logistics job at Fort Banner 3 years ago. She gave the nod. Not a smile, smiles invited questions, just the nod. Efficient. Nondescript. "Ma'am, need you to step aside for a bag check?" the younger one said, already reaching for gloves. She didn't flinch. Sure. He gestured toward the metal table bolted into the concrete. The older guard, a sergeant, gave her a quick once-over. His eyes lingered a moment too long, not out of suspicion, but something else. A feeling, like his gut told him she didn't belong here, and not because she was a threat, because she didn't fit the mold. He was right. She placed the bag down gently. The younger guard, Private Clark according to the nameplate, unzipped the flap. She was green, nervous, trying too hard. The kind that tightened their jaw to make up for uncertainty. She dumped the contents mechanically. Notebook, pen, lip balm, one protein bar, a small leather-bound book of logistics forms, a photo of an old yellow Labrador, paper edges curled from years of wear. Nothing dangerous, nothing strange. Until she reached the bottom compartment. "Gonna need to open the inner pouch," Clark said. Georgina didn't answer. She just nodded again, slow. Her eyes didn't follow their movements, but her hands twitched once, slightly. Almost like they remembered something. Her brain had already buried. Clark found the zipper, tugged it open. Then she froze. Her fingers hovered over the small black leather case, tucked precisely in the center. Perfectly square. Perfectly unremarkable. Like a coin purse. Clark lifted it, unsure. "What's this?" she asked, holding it between two fingers. The older sergeant turned his head, immediately uneasy. "Hey, don't open that." But Clark already had. The snap was quiet. The silence that followed wasn't. Held the case open like a wallet. Inside sat a single, matte black metal pin. An emblem. A talon clutching a lightning bolt, the tail of it splitting into 4 razor-pointed prongs. There were no letters, no crest, no flag, just the bird. Sleek, watching. The reaction was instant. The sergeant took a half-step back, involuntary. "Jesus Christ!" Clark blinked, confused. What is it?" The air had shifted. Suddenly it wasn't just a routine check. Even the hallway ventilation sounded like it paused. One of the nearby enlisted men walking past the checkpoint actually stopped mid-stride. sensing something off. The sergeant spoke low, like someone trying not to summon ghosts. "You weren't supposed to see that." Clark looked at him, now uncertain. "Why?" He didn't look away from the emblem. "Because that's not supposed to exist." Georgina finally stepped forward, her voice like a scalpel, precise and clean. "Put it back." Clark obeyed without a word, sliding the emblem back into its case, sealing it shut as though it might detonate if exposed to light too long. She placed it gently on the table, her fingers trembling. Georgina calmly returned each item to her bag, zipped the flap, and slung it over her shoulder. She didn't thank them. She didn't explain. She just looked at the sergeant, held his eyes a beat longer than protocol allowed, and said, "Don't log this." It wasn't a request. The sergeant nodded once. "Tight." "Understood, ma'am." She walked past them without hurry, without a glance back. The badge scanner beeped as she exited the gate. In the silence that remained, Clark finally exhaled. "What the hell was that?" she asked. The sergeant looked at her with the kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. "That emblem, that's directive level, special access. You could have triggered a protocol breach by touching it, but I didn't even recognize. You weren't supposed to, because you're not cleared to, and if it's what I think it is..." He trailed off, then stared down the hallway Georgina had disappeared into. "Then that woman outranks most of this base." "Wait, she's just logistics," Clark said, as if saying it made it true. He didn't answer. Instead, he finally reached for the radio clipped to his vest and turned the volume down all the way. Just in case. Across the base, Georgina walked into Building 6A, the materials and distribution wing. She passed rows of desks, each manned by clerks tapping away at shipping manifests and barcoding spreadsheets. She gave a small nod to the woman at reception, dropped her badge into the tray by the door, and entered her office. 4 pale green walls, 1 desk, 1 humming diffuser. A single window facing the alley where garbage trucks made their rounds at dawn. Perfect. She hung her bag on the wall hook, sat down, and exhaled. Her fingers ran across the zipper of the inner pouch once, then stopped. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Her mind wasn't here anymore. It was 2007 again. Dust thick in the air, radio static twitching in her ear. The emblem had been carved into the side of a crate she once dragged through a safe house under sniper fire. She remembered the heat, the steel weight of the rifle across her back, and the screaming in 3 languages before the building collapsed. Her scalp still bore the tiny white scar where the concrete bit her. She blinked, returned to the quiet of her office. She opened a drawer, pulled out a protein bar, and took a slow bite. The sound of distant typing filled the air, ordinary and harmless. But somewhere, maybe even in this building, a system flag had been raised because someone had just scanned a badge that didn't belong on any manifest. Someone had just triggered an identity ping that hadn't responded in over a decade. She chewed, swallowed, and waited, because she knew exactly what would come next, and she was already deciding whether to stop it. The nameplate on her door read G. Bush, Materials Flow Coordinator, printed in Regulation Helvetica, centered in a plastic frame so scratched it looked fogged from inside. It was the kind of name that passed through databases and morning meetings unnoticed, designed not to invite questions. Inside the office, the air purifier hummed with the same blind purpose as the woman who occupied the desk, each of them grinding away invisibly, 1 ion at a time. Georgina leaned back in the chair that creaked like a confession. She scanned a requisition spreadsheet filled with numbers so repetitive they blurred into a pattern more abstract than language. All around her, the building carried the buzz of the forgotten. People moving crates of hydraulic seals and landing gear pins, scanning barcodes that meant everything to supply lines and nothing to history. She preferred it that way. The less people remembered her, the safer everyone stayed. Fort Banner's logistics wing wasn't glamorous, and that was exactly the point. The heart of military power didn't always beat on the front lines. Sometimes it pulsed in copy rooms, in fluorescent-lit corridors with duct-taped carpet seams, where coffee went stale and names went unnoticed. Georgina had orchestrated that invisibility with the precision of a sniper. No pictures on her desk, no plants to water, no idle gossip, her hair tied in a no-nonsense bun, uniforms always pressed but never starched, the kind of detail that suggested she cared enough to comply but never enough to compete. She opened the drawer to her right and removed a plain manila folder. Inside were transportation logs from 2 weeks ago. Container 887PX hydraulic ram assemblies bound for a hangar in Nevada. It was already triple verified, but she reviewed it again not because she had to, but because busy hands kept memories quiet. The emblem from that morning hadn't been touched since. Still zipped in the pouch, still dormant. But she'd seen their eyes, especially the older sergeant. Recognition. Not exact, but close enough to plant a seed of curiosity. And seeds, once planted in a military environment, never stayed buried for long. Her gaze drifted to the window. All it offered was a narrow view of the alley behind Building 6A, where the base's sanitation trucks rumbled through before most personnel had their first coffee. There was comfort in that monotony. Steel schedules, predictable movement. The dull mechanics of a system built to move parts, not people. And yet, even from here she could feel it, the change in temperature that follows an invisible alarm. She turned back to her screen, just as the intercom on her desk crackled to life. She knew Bosch would like a word in conference room 3, immediately, please. It was not a request. The voice belonged to Jenna, the admin assistant from personnel. Young, sweet, but trained to sound neutral. She almost pulled it off. Georgina didn't sigh, didn't even blink. She shut her folder, powered down her monitor, and stood. Every step down the hall was measured, steady, like a march she no longer admitted she knew by heart. She passed coworkers who nodded absently, none of them aware that beneath her blouse was a titanium pendant the size of a coin. None of them knew the blood it represented, or the nations it had quietly saved. Conference room 3 was already occupied when she entered. Major Dana Watts stood by the window, hands clasped behind her back in a posture meant to invoke formality, maybe even intimidation. It didn't. The table between them was cluttered with a few open files and 2 sealed brown envelopes. A steaming cup of coffee sat untouched at the far end, a symbolic peace offering. Georgina shut the door behind her, but didn't sit. Watts turned, expression unreadable. Her hair was pinned up with surgical precision, uniform crisp, no insignia out of place. "Ms. Bush, thank you for coming," you said immediately. "So I did." Watts's lips barely moved. "Have a seat." Georgina stayed standing. "Is this disciplinary?" "No." "Then I'll stand." Watts let the silence stretch, a test of endurance. It was a poor choice. Georgina had waited in desert foxholes for 17 hours while a target blinked against a thermal scope. She could wait here forever if necessary. Finally, Watts sighed and gestured toward the table. "There was an incident this morning at Gate 3. Georgina said nothing. Watts tapped the envelope nearest to her. "A junior guard submitted a report. Routine bag check escalated when she discovered a classified emblem in your possession. Sergeant Reddick corroborated the account but declined to comment further." Still, Georgina didn't respond. Watts leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Bush, Georgina, help me understand. I have an entire report here that reads like a conspiracy theory. There are mentions of a symbol that doesn't exist in any public registry. One of my staff said the moment it was revealed, the entire checkpoint went quiet. That doesn't happen unless something big is happening. Or about to. Georgina studied her. Watts wasn't trying to trap her. Not yet. She was grasping at shadows, hoping for light. Georgina tilted her head. Do you know what it's like to carry something no one can talk about? I've held security clearance for over a decade. I'm familiar. No, Georgina said quietly. You're familiar with information. What I carry, what they saw, that's not just a file or a password. That's a decision. Watts frowned. A decision to disappear. That hung in the air for a moment. Georgina stepped forward, calm as gravity. You won't find anything in your systems, not under that emblem, not under my full name, not even in legacy archives. That's the point? Watts hesitated. Then how did that badge exist? Because not all ghosts are dead. Some of us are just archived differently. Another long pause. Watts finally broke eye contact. She picked up the untouched coffee, sipped it absently, then set it back down without tasting it. I've spoken to Colonel Granger, she said. He's suggested we wait to escalate until we've clarified your employment background. But unofficially, Georgina, people are going to talk. Let them. You don't care. I care about duty. I care about logistics, arriving on time and not losing aircraft parts in transit. I care that our people get what they need when they need it. I don't care what rumors float between vending machines. Watts studied her for another long beat. Then she said something Georgina didn't expect. You're not what I thought you were. Georgina gave a half smile. Few people are. She turned to leave. Miss Bush. She paused. Watts asked, that emblem, what does it mean? Georgina didn't look back. It means someone once trusted me with the worst-case scenario. And then she left. Back at her office, she locked the door behind her, sat down, let the silence return. Outside, a garbage truck rumbled past, predictable and harmless. But the rhythm had changed. The bass was shifting in ways it didn't yet understand, and somewhere beneath it all, the network she'd once left behind had just received a ping they hadn't expected, which meant they were either about to reach out or come in person, and Georgina Bush wasn't sure which she preferred. No one asked her about the photo on her desk, because there wasn't one. No frame, no family, no degrees on the wall, just a ceramic mug that read, "This might be whiskey," a gift from a coworker who mistakenly thought Georgina had a sense of humor. She kept it because it made her invisible in the right way, approachable but unmemorable. That was always the trick. She filed the incident with Major Watts, away, the same way she filed everything else that brushed too close to memory. With careful, deliberate compartmentalization, one folder deeper than the last. There had been a time when silence wasn't just preferred, it was surgically enforced. That kind of silence doesn't fade. It calcifies. On Thursday, the copy machine jammed. On Friday, the wrong SEAL kits arrived for a grounded C-130. And somewhere in between, someone tried to access her personnel file from a restricted node in base intelligence. They left no trace. But that was the thing about ghosts. You learned to spot their fingerprints, even when they wore gloves. She left the office 15 minutes early that afternoon. Not enough to raise suspicion, just enough to reestablish unpredictability. Patterns got people killed, even in peacetime. She took the long route back to the south parking lot, crossing behind the motor pool. A field of parked Humvees baked under a sky as colorless as bleached bone. She moved through their shadows like she belonged there, because once she had. A figure leaned against the side of an old troop transport near the fuel depot. Arms crossed, tan ball cap pulled low, boots scuffed just enough to hint at history. Georgina clocked him at 60 paces. Knew his gait. even from stillness. Staff Sergeant Miguel Torres, 10 years younger than her and 30 pounds heavier now. His right leg bore the same mechanical hit she remembered from Kandahar. 2 pins, 1 plate, and enough gilt welded into his femur to last a lifetime. He didn't stop walking until she reached him. He didn't speak, just offered her a stick of gum like nothing had passed between them. She took it, unwrapped it, chewed. He said, "You triggered them. Didn't mean to. They're nervous. Always should be." Miguel stared off toward the hangars. "Colonel Grange's assistant contacted me this morning. Said I was listed as one of your references." Georgina raised an eyebrow. "That wasn't supposed to happen." "No, it wasn't. Which tells me someone's going off script." She sighed. "You working black mad now?" "Contractor. Systems ops. Nothing fancy." "Still cleared?" He nodded once. "Same depth as before. But my phone lit up with a priority flag this morning. I thought it was a glitch until I saw the sender ID." "Alpha line?" she asked. "Echo Ghost." That stopped her. Echo Ghost was never supposed to reach out again, not unless there was a breach, a compromise, or a death. Miguel glanced at her. "They think you're exposed." It wasn't. Some overeager private unzipped the wrong compartment and saw the bird. He didn't know what it meant. "They never do," he said quietly. "But someone upstairs does. They'll follow the echo." Georgina swallowed. Her throat felt tight. Miguel tapped his temple. "You ever think about it? That last mission?" She stared ahead. "Every time I close my eyes." "You ever regret it?" She met his eyes. "Every day." "I don't." He gave a thin smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "They told me you signed the remission clause. Said you were done." "I was. And now..." She said nothing. Miguel nodded slowly, understanding too much without needing words. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. No markings. Just weight. This came through internal courier. No return. Just the trigger code embedded in the delivery manifest. "I shouldn't be giving it to you." She took the envelope. It was warm from his body heat. "You saw the sender ID?" He hesitated. It wasn't Ghost. Georgina tensed. It was Burke. That changed everything. Chief Warrant Officer Alan Burke had been the last name on her team's active roster. If he was surfacing now, after all these years, then something was about to break. She slipped the envelope into the lining of her jacket. Not another word passed between them. Torres walked off first, disappearing into the maze of vehicles. She waited until he was gone before turning toward her car. That night, she sat in her small rental home off base, the envelope on the kitchen table. She hadn't touched it yet. The lights were low, her boots unlaced. She stared at it, like it might breathe. She remembered Burke's voice. Deep, even, always 5 seconds ahead of disaster. They'd spent 2 years in a Black Ops unit so buried even their cover stories had aliases. Red Falcon had been the official code name, a name whispered only in vaults and war rooms, a name not meant for records. Their insignia had been the bird, lightning bolt tail, the symbol she'd kept hidden for over a decade. One by one, their team had gone dark. Some killed in action, some folded into intelligence roles. A few disappeared without trace, burned assets, failed exfiltrations. She was the only one who had signed the remission clause, the only one who chose to walk away. And now Burke was calling her back. She opened the envelope. Inside, a single photograph. Grainy. Surveillance time. A figure in a tan coat exiting a military hospital in D.C. The timestamp was 2 weeks ago. Below it, a single line typed on a plain white slip. The list wasn't complete. No signature, no contact number, just those 4 words. She stared at them, heart cold. The list had been everything. The list was the entire reason Red Falcon had gone into the ground. A kill list encrypted across 4 continents, detailing operations, operators, and assets that could cripple 5 nations if leaked. It had been neutralized, scrubbed, burned, or so they believed. If Burke was telling her the list had survived, or worse, had resurfaced, then all of them were in danger. She leaned back in the chair, eyes on the ceiling, gum long since flavorless. Then she stood. He walked into the bedroom and opened the floorboard beneath her bed. The case was still there, wrapped in oilcloth, her backup sidearm, 2 old comm bands, a flash drive with a partition key no one outside Falcon should have ever cracked. She ran her fingers along the matte metal casing of the sidearm. The serial number had been filed off. She didn't feel fear, not exactly. What she felt was inevitability, like the wind in the trees just before a storm. And somewhere far away, Georgina Bush imagined Alan Burke watching a screen, waiting for her response. She wasn't sure yet if he'd get it, but she had just pulled her gun from the floor, which meant silence was no longer enough. The hallway outside her office smelled like old toner and lemon disinfectant. Someone had left a half-eaten muffin on the edge of the shared kitchenette counter again. The microwave beeped every 30 seconds like it was clearing its throat. And yet, the entire wing felt quieter than usual. Not empty, just waiting, like a church before a funeral. Georgina stepped into the corridor with a stack of manifests under one arm, eyes straight ahead, posture just this side of civilian. Her boots didn't echo when she walked, they whispered. After years of moving in silence, the skill hadn't faded. She passed 2 enlisted men near the printers. Both stopped talking when she neared. One of them looked at her with something new behind his eyes. Curiosity, or worse, recognition. That was new. She didn't stop, didn't slow, just walked like everything inside her wasn't suddenly on high alert. At her desk, she set the manifests down, opened the logistics app, and keyed in 3 requests before she allowed herself a glance at the calendar reminder blinking in the corner of her screen. Utilities Review, CR1, W/Max. D. Watts. Another invitation dressed up as a meeting. At 9:56, she stood. By 10 o'clock, she knocked once and entered the conference room without waiting. Major Dana Watts was already seated at the table, hands folded, hair tight, no makeup today. She looked tired. Not sleepless tired, something deeper, like she'd opened a file she wished she hadn't. Across from her sat someone Georgina hadn't expected. Colonel Thomas Granger, base commander. Iron gray hair, trim mustache, spotless uniform that practically glared. His name tag looked like it could slice paper. She hadn't seen him up close before. He usually operated at the satellite level, too high to concern himself with the invisible wheels of logistics. Until now. Granger looked up when she entered, gaze sharp and unreadable. "Ms. Bush," he said. "Sit." She didn't realize I was summoned. Granger gave the faintest hint of a smile. "Let's call it an alignment." Watts gestured to the seat across from them. "Please." Georgina took it slowly. She didn't lean back. Granger steepled his fingers. "This won't take long. Major Watts brought something to my attention that I believe requires clarity." "Security checkpoint," Georgina said. "Gate 3. Junior officer saw something she wasn't supposed to. You read the report?" "Then you know what I'm going to say." "I suspect I do," Granger replied, "but say it anyway." She leaned forward, hands folded. "That emblem is classified at a level above your current command clearance. And that's not ego, that's doctrine. I signed a remission clause. I operate under restricted civilian jurisdiction. I am not active. I am not a threat. I am not your concern." Watts spoke before Granger could. But it is our concern when an inactive operator is living inside our walls and hiding credentials buried deeper than most NATO clearances. I didn't hide anything, Georgina said evenly. It was never yours to uncover. Granger watched her closely. Red Falcon? Her face didn't change, but her silence confirmed everything. Granger nodded once. That program was terminated 12 years ago. It was burned, she corrected. There's a difference. And your role? I was the last field unit to go dark. My identity was sealed under Omega status. The only reason that emblem still exists is because it was never officially inventoried. Watts leaned back. So you admit the breach? There was no breach, Georgina said, voice suddenly sharp. A breach would require exposure. What happened at that gate was an accident, a lapse in control, and yes, that's on me, but don't mistake that for a leak. Granger didn't blink. The emblem outranks every clearance in this building. Yes. Are you still here? Because I chose logistics, she answered simply. Because I'd rather count screws than bodies. Because this job makes sense, and the last one didn't. Watts looked at Granger. We could escalate this to the Pentagon. You could, Georgina said, but then you'd invite questions you're not authorized to answer. Granger smiled faintly again. She's right. Watts stared. Sir? I read her file, Granger said. The shadow one. Took a call to Fort Bragg and a favor I was saving. It was mostly redacted, but enough remained. Georgina tilted her head. So what now? Granger leaned forward. That depends. Have you been contacted? Her pulse ticked up, but her face remained still. What makes you think I would be? Because something triggered your file. That emblem has an echo protocol baked into the system. When it's exposed, it pings buried nodes. Somebody saw the echo. Somebody followed it. Georgina nodded slowly. I received a courier envelope. No return. Untraceable routing. Content implied operational threat. From whom? Watts asked. She looked at Granger. Alan Burke. That got a reaction. Granger leaned back. He's listed as inactive, possibly deceased. He's not. What did he send? A surveillance photo and a message. The list wasn't complete. Watts frowned. What list? But Granger already understood. Target list, from the Falcon shutdown, names, coordinates, assets. I was told it was burned, Georgina said quietly. It was, Granger said, or so we believed. Then why contact me? She asked. Granger gave her a long look. Because if Burke's alive, then others might be. Or worse, someone else has the list. And you're the only one left who can verify it. Georgina stood. Watts rose too. Where you going? Back to work, Georgina said, until someone gives me a reason not to. Granger didn't stop her, but as she reached the door, he said, If Burke reaches out again, we need to know. She turned her head. If Burke reaches out again, you'll feel it before I do. And she walked out. Back in the corridor, she passed the same enlisted men from earlier. They stiffened a little more this time. One offered her a hesitant nod. The other avoided her gaze. Echoes. That's what secrets became when they weren't handled. Not bombs, not bullets. Echoes. Vibrations that slipped through cracks and woke people up in the middle of the night. She walked the length of the hallway, turned the corner, and nearly collided with someone just outside the mailroom. A woman in her mid-30s, clipboard in hand, brown curls pinned back with a base-issued pencil. She startled, took a step back, and froze when she saw Georgina. Sorry, man. I didn't see you. It's fine, Georgina said, brushing past. But the woman's eyes stayed on her. Not with suspicion. With awe. That's when Georgina knew. The story was out, and it was no longer hers to control. There were things she could tolerate: paperwork errors, late freight arrivals, even the occasional under-the-breath comment from someone who didn't know better. What Georgina couldn't tolerate was her name appearing in systems it was supposed to be purged from. It started with a requisition form, a minor detail, a field that auto-filled with her clearance level, only instead of the standard civilian tag, it listed her under Echo Priority, a code she hadn't seen since her last field operation under Red Falcon. She sat at her desk staring at it, not breathing, the hum of the bass vanishing behind the roar of distant memory. Echo Priority was an internal tag, legacy system, not connected to anything on the base's current infrastructure. It meant only one thing. Someone inside had accessed the old records. Not a file, not a personnel ID. The records. The archive vaults buried in off-grid terminals, accessible only by those who still held a key. There weren't supposed to be any left. She shut down her monitor, slid the requisition folder into her locked drawer, and picked up her bag. As she zipped it, her hand brushed against the leather case. The emblem was still inside, untouched. She hadn't dared move it since the checkpoint. Now its presence felt heavier, like it was waiting. Georgina walked past Building 6A's reception without a word. She took the path behind the comm shed, cut through the munitions loading zone, and slipped into the utility corridor beneath the mess hall, one of the few places on base without a camera or badge reader. From there it was 2 turns and a steel-reinforced door to reach the classified access wing, where high-clearance terminals were air-gapped and monitored by a skeleton crew of intel contractors. She didn't stop at the front desk. She didn't flash a badge. She walked in like she had every right to be there. Because once she had. A man with thinning hair and a Red Horse Squadron patch on his sleeve looked up from a monitor. "Ma'am, you're not cleared for this wing." Georgina didn't slow. "Override 31A, Directive Blackbird." The man blinked. His hand hovered over a red key. "That's not active protocol." "It is now." She reached the final room, a cooled vault space with 3 offline systems and 1 red terminal that hadn't been powered on in nearly a decade. She keyed in a series of commands. The screen remained black for 6 seconds. Then a green cursor blinked once. "Welcome back, Blackbird." Her throat went dry. She keyed in the code Burke used in his courier message, IL-909C. A screen flickered. An error message. Then a secondary prompt appeared. Confirmed identity. Voice or retina required. She leaned in close, eyes to the scanner. A pause. Then a soft chime. Access granted. The screen filled with a list. Names, code names, mission tags, coordinates, all familiar. But at the bottom, a new entry glowed in red. Appended record. Date modified 3 days ago. She clicked it. The file loaded slowly, unusual for a system not connected to anything but itself, which meant someone had patched it. Recently. The new entries were shocking. Not just names that had supposedly died in action, not just operators, civilians, contractors, base commanders. Her own name, Bush, G, was listed twice. And once under her official Falcon service record, and once under a new category, asset of interest. They were tracking her. Again. The door behind her opened. She didn't turn. The voice said, "I was hoping you'd find that." She turned. Alan Burke stood in the doorway, dressed like a civilian, ball cap, hoodie, the same dead calm in his eyes he'd always carried, like nothing ever surprised him. Except now he looked older. Scar over his left cheek, limp in his right leg. But the eyes? Still the same. "You broke protocol," she said. He gave a slight shrug. "Protocol broke first." Georgina stepped back from the console. This system was supposed to be sealed. It was, until someone inside cracked it open. No, but I followed the echo. Same one that pinged when your emblem went live. She folded her arms. Why am I tagged? Because someone high up wants to know who survived Falcon. You tripped the wire when you let that guard see the badge. That was an accident. Doesn't matter, he said. The list was never fully burned, Georgie. That's what they never told us. A shadow copy existed. Off-site. Non-sanctioned. It was supposed to be insurance for some private spook circle. Insurance? Burke nodded. Leverage, in case any of us got too noisy. She stared at the red terminal. And now they're pulling it back into the light? Trying to, but there's more. That file you just opened, it's been accessed 5 times, none of them by me. She looked up. By who? He stepped forward. 3 DC terminals, 1 foreign IP, and 1 inside this base. The air shifted. Inside? She asked. Someone here's not who they say they are. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, how many names on the list are still alive? Work's eyes darkened. Not enough. Then what are you doing here? I came to warn you, he said, because you're next. They'll try to wrap you back in or erase you, and they'll use someone you trust to do it. The door behind him creaked. Georgina reached for her side, then relaxed. It was Granger. The colonel looked from Burke to her. I was followed. Burke gave him a once-over. Good. That means we're out of time. Granger closed the door behind him and leaned against it. His jaw was tight. There's a clearance breach in the comms wing. Someone spoofed your badge, Ms. Bush. Security's been dispatched. Georgina already knew. She pulled the emblem case from her bag, set it on the terminal table, opened it. The Falcon glinted under the cool fluorescent light. Burke gave a low whistle. Still carrying it. Only thing they never stripped from me, she replied. Granger stared at it, then at her. Watch her move. Georgina stared at the glowing screen, the flickering red data tag. Someone wants me quiet, she said. But I didn't come back to be silenced. Burke grinned. Then we make noise. The sirens didn't wail, they clicked. Twice. A short, coded burst from the emergency alert system that only a handful on base would recognize. The sound was designed for insiders, not panic. Anyone else would mistake it for a faulty test. But Georgina knew exactly what it meant. Lockdown imminent. Within 2 minutes, all non-essential buildings would be sealed. Hallway lights would dim to low blue protocol. Cameras would reset to higher frame capture. Keycard access would freeze, reauthorized only from the command center. The breach was live, and someone inside Fort Banner was no longer hiding. Georgina shut down the red terminal manually. No logs, no trace. The screen dimmed with a final flicker, taking the buried list with it. The emblem snapped back into its leather pouch. It felt heavier now, like it had soaked up the tension in the room. Burke moved like a man preparing for a storm he couldn't outrun, and Granger's eyes were scanning corners like he no longer trusted shadows. Granger keyed his comm. Ops Control, this is Banner Actual. We are moving to Tier 2 protocol. Elevate all perimeter security and restrict comms to secured channels only. Confirm. A tinny voice replied. Tier 2 acknowledged. Executing lockdown in 60 seconds. He looked at Georgina. You need to move now. She was already pulling her bag on. Where? East Hangar. Storage Bay, C. That's a dead zone, Burke added. No feeds, no relay signals, no comms. Exactly, Granger said. Georgina gave a tight nod. Let's move. They left the vault room together, weaving through lower maintenance corridors as the overhead lights shifted to blue. A low alarm buzzed through the walls, barely audible but persistent. Personnel they passed didn't ask questions. Some stiffened at the sight of Granger. A few looked twice at Georgina but quickly turned away. The story had already begun to spread. They passed a logistics intern who actually stopped and saluted her. She didn't break stride. Burke scanned every junction, like muscle memory, his hand hovering near his belt, not for a weapon, but for the invisible readiness of a soldier who once trusted his life to instincts, not armor. Halfway through corridor E9, they ran into a blockade. 2 military police stood near a cross-section, rifles lowered but bodies tense. One of them, a corporal with a clipboard, raised a hand. "Sir, I've been instructed to reroute personnel from this wing. It's part of the lockdown sweep." Granger cut him off. "Override Banner Actual, code Fox Delta 3-0. These 2 are with me." The corporal hesitated. Granger stepped closer, voice cold. Now, they were let through. But Georgina didn't miss the second MP's glance at her. Not curiosity this time. Something colder. Calculated. As they moved past, she tapped Burke's arm gently. "Right guard." Burke gave a small nod. Saw it. They reached Storage Bay C through a rear stairwell. The door clicked behind them. No lights inside except the glow from old sodium bulbs overhead. The room smelled of dust, motor oil, and silence. Dozens of old metal crates were stacked along the walls, some labeled "Most Forgotten." "This used to be a Cold War drone storage," Granger said. "No one's been down here in months. Comms can't penetrate it." Georgina set her bag on a crate. "Good. Because someone inside base security just tried to ghost my badge." Burke whistled. "That's not low level, that takes admin access." "It gets worse," she said. "When I was in the terminal, one of the red tag entries had a location ping. This base. Whoever accessed that list didn't just stumble onto it. They're already in our house." Granger's face hardened. "Which means you're the bait." "I've been bait before," she said. Burke unzipped his coat and produced a compact transmitter. "I have a short-range scramble box, no signal in or out, but if anyone gets too close it'll light up." He set it on the crate. A dull red light pulsed. "Armed." Granger leaned on a steel shelf. "We need to draw them out." "They're already coming," Georgina said. "How do you know?" She pulled her weapon from her bag, checked the mag, chambered it. "Because I would." A beat. Footsteps. One set. Confident. Not rushed. Whoever it was didn't care about being quiet. Granger reached for his comm. "Banner Actual." Static. Georgina and Burke moved to opposite sides of the bay, taking cover behind crates. Granger stood still, his position central, exposed, deliberate. The door clicked again. Then opened. Sergeant Reddick stepped inside, unarmed. At least visibly. He looked younger in this light. But his eyes, too still, too calm. Georgina raised her voice. "You followed the echo." Reddick's mouth twitched. "Didn't take much. You left fingerprints." "Who sent you?" Granger asked. Reddick didn't answer. Burke stepped into the light. "You have 5 seconds before I assume hostile intent." Reddick looked at him. "Burke. Thought you were dead." "Close enough." Georgina stepped out too. "What are you after?" He looked at her. "Not you. The list. I was only supposed to tag you, not touch. Just observe." Granger stepped forward. "Orders from who?" Reddick finally showed a smile. It wasn't pleasant. People who knew the list still had value. Georgina's grip on the pistol didn't change. "They wanted to wake the dead. They want leverage," Reddick said. "If you're still alive, so are others, and leverage is only useful if you can show you hold the key." "And what if I don't give it to you?" she asked. His smile faded. "That would be disappointing." Sharp whines split the air. Burke's scramble box lit green. Proximity trigger. Company, Burke muttered. 3 more entered through the side, faces masked, all in civvies, military posture. One of them held a tablet. High-frequency scanner. Georgina moved fast, dropped into a crouch, fired 1 warning shot into the ceiling. The room exploded into chaos. Burke dove behind a crate, returned fire low, 2 shots into the floor to scatter the team's position. Granger had already flipped a container and was barking coded directives into his disabled comms. Radek ducked, pulled a taser from his vest, but didn't aim. Instead, he slid it across the floor. A signal. Georgina kicked it aside. Too late. Another shot rang out. Burke clipped one of the intruders in the leg. The man screamed, dropped the scanner. Georgina advanced, took cover, and turned the corner with lethal speed. Her pistol found Radek again. This time, he didn't move. "I was just doing my job," he muttered. "So was I," she said. The backup team was disarmed within 30 seconds. The one Burke wounded was still conscious, bleeding but stable. Granger tied the rest with old cargo netting. He looked at Georgina, chest rising and falling. "What now?" She lowered her weapon. "We find who sent them." Burke nodded. "And then?" She picked up the Emblem case again, closed it slowly. "Then we finish what should have been finished 12 years ago." The interrogation room had no clock. That was deliberate. A subtle tactic to unsettle the subject, distort their sense of time. But Georgina Bush didn't need a clock to understand what hour this was. It was the hour after the dust settled. The hour when truths were finally told. Not because they wanted to be, but because there was nowhere else left to hide. Sergeant Reddick sat at the metal table, wrists cuffed. Blood dried at the corner of his mouth from the scuffle. His shoulders sagged, not in defeat, but like the weight he'd been carrying had finally found somewhere to land. Across from him sat Granger, flanked by a civilian intelligence officer flown in from Langley 2 hours ago. Burke leaned against the wall near the door, arms crossed, watching. Georgina stood with her back to the mirror. She had said very little so far, and she didn't plan to speak unless Radek gave her a reason. He cleared his throat and said, without looking up, "It wasn't personal." Burke snorted. "That's always how it starts." Radek shifted. "They approached me 3 years ago. Civilian firm, Intel adjacent. Called themselves Argon Systems. Said they were building contingency networks. Wanted access to dormant clearance files. Claimed they were government-sanctioned. They weren't," Granger said flatly. Radek nodded. "Found that out. Too late. Once I was in, it wasn't about information anymore. It was insurance. For them. For me." "And the Emblem?" Georgina asked finally. Radek looked at her. "They didn't believe the Falcon list still existed. They thought it was a ghost story. But then someone pinged the system. And I saw your name come up. My job changed. You were supposed to observe. Until it became clear you were awake." That word hung there, awake, and Georgina felt it settle into her bones. Granger spoke carefully. "What do they want with the list now?" Radek's voice lowered. "Control. Global contracts. Leverage. Every name on that list ties back to unsanctioned missions. Operations nobody will publicly admit to. If they can identify even a few survivors and put pressure on them, they control narratives, rewrite history, rewrite accountability." Burke let out a breath. "So, we're not just loose ends, we're bargaining chips." Georgina stepped forward. "Who else do they have?" Radek hesitated. "Then, Burke was the last name I saw before mine." That silence again. The intelligence officer stood, took a folder off the table, and nodded once to Granger. "We have enough. We'll begin dismantling the network from our end. There will be arrests, names buried. You'll be contacted when necessary." Granger looked to Georgina. You good with that? She didn't answer the question. She just asked, what happens to him? The intel officer glanced at Radek. Asset turned. Useful. Controlled environment. We may repurpose. Georgina shook her head. He's a soldier, not a pawn. That's not your call, the officer said. Georgina stepped closer. Then take it to someone higher than you, because I'll burn the rest of the list myself before I let you turn him into another tool. The officer looked at Granger. Granger gave a slight nod. She has clearance authority, he said, even if she hasn't used it in over a decade. The officer sighed. Fine. He'll be monitored, but not deployed. Radek looked up at her then, eyes glassy. Why are you doing this? Georgina studied him. Because I know what it's like to follow orders that leave scars you can't see, and because someone once gave me the benefit of the doubt when I didn't deserve it. She left the room without another word. The next morning, the base returned to normal. Or tried to. The lockdown lifted quietly, no press release, no whispers beyond the few who needed to know. Security protocols were tightened. The breach was listed as an internal training drill on the week's bulletin. Everyone nodded and moved on. But in the heart of Fort Banner, something had changed. Georgina's desk remained where it always had, cluttered now with forms and incoming parts logs. A new air purifier hummed next to her feet. She hadn't requested it, but she didn't complain. Someone must have thought she earned a bit of fresh air. Staff Sergeant Miguel Torres stopped by with a requisition sheet he didn't need her to approve. He lingered awkwardly by the doorway until she finally looked up. You all right? He asked. She nodded. You? He shrugged. The limp's permanent. The ghosts, too. She smiled faintly. We carry what we must. He leaned against the doorframe. People are talking. About what? Yeah. She returned to typing. They'll forget. No, he said. I don't think they will. Later that afternoon, Major Watts arrived. She knocked, but didn't wait to be invited in. Her posture was looser than before, less clipped. She placed a file on Georgina's desk without speaking. Georgina opened it. Inside was a new badge. Her name, Georgina Bush. Her position, Classified Operations Liaison, REAP. Clearance. Echo/Directive reinstated limited use. She closed the folder and looked out. Watts said, You earned it. Not for what you did this week. For what you did when no one knew who you were. Georgina stared at the badge a moment longer, then tucked it into her desk drawer. I'm not coming back, she said. Watts nodded. I know. It's just acknowledgement. Georgina didn't smile, but something in her face softened. When the office was empty again, she pulled her bag from the hook, opened the small inner pocket, removed the leather case. She opened it. The emblem sat there, still, black talon, lightning bolt tail. No rank, no division, just a symbol known only to a dozen living people. It had been treated like trash by someone who didn't understand it, feared by those who glimpsed its truth, and now, finally, it sat in her hand as a piece of peace. She didn't carry it anymore for duty. She carried it from memory, for honor, for the names never spoken out loud. She zipped the pouch, placed the bag on her shoulder, and walked out of Building 6A. Her boots touched pavement warmed by afternoon sun. The wind was light. The perimeter was quiet. At the gate, the same young guard from days before stood on duty, Private Clark. She spotted Georgina approaching and stiffened. Georgina gave her a small nod. Clark hesitated, then said, Ma'am, I didn't know what that emblem meant. I didn't mean to. Georgina stopped her with a raised hand. It's all right. You weren't supposed to know. You saw it, you respected it, that's what matters. Clark nodded. It won't happen again. I hope it does, Georgina said softly. Just not the same way. Clark blinked, confused. Ma'am? Georgina offered a half-smile. One day, someone will look at you and not know who you are. And you'll have something inside them they couldn't earn in 100 lifetimes. When that day comes, let them underestimate you. Then decide if they deserve to learn better. And with that, she walked on. Not away from something, but toward whatever would come next. Because the emblem inside wasn't just metal. It was her story. And now, finally, it was hers to carry in peace.